Hey guys, today I'm going to be reading a short story that I wrote. Um, it's kind of a fan fiction for the series Young Wizards by Diane Duane. But the only thing that I borrowed from the series is the villain, because there's one main villain in all the books. So, all the rest of it, the characters and the world and the way they talk and things, it's all original. It's fantasy. And I guess I hope you enjoy it. So, it's called The Chamber of Restitution, by me, Indigo. Wow, this place is huge. Kalea tilted back her head and extended her neck. I didn't know it was going to be so white. According to the records, it was built 9 centuries ago by the former inhabitants, a bug-like species called the Dorflassen. 12 legs, 3 eyes, and very high intelligence. Apparently they just disappeared right after they completed the inner temple. Rothis flipped through the pages of an invisible book hanging in the air. Doesn't make that much sense, considering it usually likes mindless minions. And why would they disappear? Wouldn't it want them around for the war? Kalea sucked her neck back to its normal proportions. You're reading the records. Check the most recent entries. Rothis frowned. There's nothing. Just a normal maintenance routine when someone comes to check on the sentience every 100 years. It's sad that there's nothing about the disappearance in the records. You'd think there'd be some indication of why. Audendet was a bit peculiar about this particular mission. It was like he had an ulterior motive in sending us here. Maybe we're here to wake up the sentients. Rothis stopped peering at the book that wasn't there and looked over at his companion. Why? We've been keeping it asleep for all these years. With long blue arms, Kalea gestured expansively at the large white hall they were standing in. This place is a feeling of anticipation. What else did Audendet say about the maintenance in the past? Did anyone ever have any problems? He actually seemed reluctant to say anything about the others who came here, like they all died or something. Well, us being so young, I doubt he would have sent us here if he didn't think we could handle it. Rothis didn't reply. In situations like these, Kalea's talent for knowing things that should be unknowable generally turned out to be more correct than the data he could read from the surroundings. I guess. What did you mean about a feeling of anticipation? Kalea moved forward on blue legs toward the other end of the hall, shuffling her feet on the marble-like stone that made up all the surface area. Rothis followed her, bringing along the records, which he had transferred themselves to his mind. Whether she hadn't heard his question, or just didn't know the answer yet, Kalea didn't respond as they walked in silence down the hall. Little by little, Rothis became uncomfortably aware of her presence taking note of their arrival. He tried not to look at the ceiling, which seemed to have eyes trained on him and Kalea. She appeared not to notice anything, but with Kalea, you could never tell. Oftentimes she noticed much more than she let on. They came to a large door made of the same white stone, and only discernible by the border of black that created a doorframe. Rothis stepped forward and laid his hand on the door. A moment later, it silently and slowly swung open, revealing a large room carved from red stone with white and black patterns set into the floor. Kalea squinted at the first sign and walked carefully up to it. There's writing in this. I think I can read it if... And Kalea squinted at the floor for a few moments, while Rothis worked further into the room. Enter the Chamber of Restitution? To be certain your debt is paid. No, your debt will be paid. No, hang on. She swung out her neck and looked at the writing from different angles. Let me try again. Enter the Chamber of Restitution if you are certain your debt is paid. Or will be paid. I'm not sure which. Let me look at the other messages. Are you sure they're messages at all? It could just be pieces of some ancient poem or something. Rothus felt his red cheeks heat up as Kalea delivered a withering glance at him. All right, I know what this place was built for, or rather, who, but still, what does restitution have to do with it? He opened a mental image of the record book from the hall and scanned page after page. It's restitution, all right. Looks like those Dorflassen owed it some sort of debt. She moved all around the room as she surveyed each pattern message. So not only did they have to build it a big white temple thing, but then they... Kalea scrunched up her face and stopped reading the floor messages. Oh. Rothus gave up on the record since they showed nothing but nonsense after the entry declaring that the Dorflassen disappeared. Oh? Wait a minute, I want to check the last of the messages. Kalea scurried across the floor and bent over the final black and white design before the red wall to the right. They're all pretty similar. Actually, they're all part of the same message, with some parts repeated, but that's for emphasis. It's the parts in the middle that you read as the next line, as if it was written out in ordinary, at least their native language, the Dorflassen language, I mean. The beginnings and endings are just to encase it properly. It must be part of the form and makes the restitution bit very clear. No one coming in here could mistake this for another meaning. Rothus rolled his eyes briefly at her typical way of explaining without really explaining, but then he perked up at the last sentence. I think I understand now. Tapping one foot on the red floor, Rothus folded his arms. So, tell me, then we can figure out how awake the sentence is, possibly put it to sleep again, and get out of here. I don't like this place. You wouldn't, Kalea mused, then stood up straight and walked to the center of the room. All right, here's what it says all together, as best as I can understand anyway. She started to speak as though she were reciting a ballad. Enter the Chamber of Restitution. The price is heavy. The story is old. If life means nothing, discard it, like the price that must be paid. The chamber is here, forever it waits, the dark and the light. Enter the Chamber of Restitution. The debt will be paid. Life will end. And it repeats a couple of times, but like I said before, it's just for emphasis. Rothus blew out slowly. That's not foreboding at all. Well, it's not. Not really. The message is pertinent any time, for always. Kalea was scribbling away at the interpretation she was writing down on one of the scraps of paper she kept on a person. It's even pertinent to us, even if the debt is not owed by us. Rothus blinked. Kalea. She didn't look up from her paper as she made corrections to the message. Yes? The last line, the debt will be paid, life will end. You do think it just means that the Dorflassen, wherever they went, will have to pay it, don't you? I think they already did. Then why is the message pertinent to us? Because it thinks everyone is in its debt. A binding like this, well, it could make it out to apply to anyone, the way it twists all its words to fit its own meaning. His fingers clenching and unclenching nervously, Rothus thought about this for about 3.5 seconds. So, in other words, anyone who enters the Chamber of Restitution has to pay the debt. According to it. And you're not worried? This means we'll probably have to fight our way out of here. Kalea finally stopped writing and squinted instead at her companion, a patient smile on her face. No, Rothus, we won't. Because if it can interpret this message to mean anyone, we can interpret it to mean the Dorflassen, and they've already paid. But their lives. Her smile dropped away. So are we going to check on the sentience or what? Rothus shook his head in an effort to clear it of doubt. Right, let's do that. I want to leave this creepy place as soon as we can. By silent consent, they stayed close together while trekking through another long white hallway after the red room. After arriving at the mouth of a cave-like staircase, Rothus took the lead. Not because he thought Kalea was afraid, but because he didn't want to show his own fear. A brave face was almost as essential to a mission like this as bringing along the proper equipment. Not that it was wise to ignore caution when poking around in its territory, but courage was often the most important tool a wizard could carry. The staircase, being black and dark and wide enough for only 2 people to pass each other, also seemed endless. Around and around the 2 wizards stepped, with Rothus holding a wizard's light in one hand to show the way. Although he could not see her, Rothus knew that Kalea was preparing her spells, reciting in her head 8 of 9 words to a killing spell or a shield spell, among others. He tried to do the same. If not for Kalea's interpretation of pattern messages from the Red Room, he wouldn't have felt so nervous. But the words kept rebounding in his mind. Enter the Chamber of Restitution. The debt will be paid. Life will end. And despite Kalea's apparent indifference to those words, he couldn't bring himself to simply ignore them. She said the debt had already been paid. But didn't it always consider wizards to be in its debt? Rothus focused himself again. They were here to check on the sentients, that was all. If they met with some resistance, well, they were prepared for that. They'd met it before and come out alive. They would do so again. We're here. Rothus jerked his head up and realized that 2 steps down and ahead of him was a massive black door. He walked down and up to the obsidian-like door and made to place one hand on it. No, don't! Kalea yanked his hand away. It's a trap. Don't try to open it. But there's no other door. This is not a door. It's the entrance. Follow me. And she walked through the stone. Rothus stared after her. He was tempted to poke the stone to see if it was an illusion or some kind of a liquid held in place by a spell. His mind scraped at his surroundings and came up with nothing but a deadly stillness emanated from the door that almost shouted, "Touch me!" Inhaling a deep breath, Rothus closed his eyes and walked forward. He passed through something that was nothing, and his light went out. Once on the other side of this shivery nothingness, he attempted to produce another wizard's light, but nothing happened. Kalea? He couldn't see anything. A ball of bluish light appeared near his face, and Kalea's face lit up in front of him. You're afraid. It's just darkness, Rothus. We've made it before. Face it without fear. We bring light. Her periwinkle eyes steadied him, and his light bobbed up next to hers, a reddish ball-shaped lantern. Good. Now let's go. The inner chamber is where the sentient sleeps. It's sleeping? I don't know. The walls are too thick. Rothus quirked his eyebrows at this, but didn't say anything. Kalea couldn't know everything, nor did he expect her to. But for her to admit it, was she also afraid? Just a little bit? The thought that she might actually reassured him further, and his hand stopped trembling. He followed his companion as she strode rather confidently across the black floor toward whatever lay in the darkness ahead. The opposite wall rose out of nowhere, it seemed to Rothus, who nearly smashed his nose against the polished blackness that shimmered faintly in the glow of his wizard's light. Kalea had stopped just before what apparently was the door to the inner chamber. Will my touch work here? Rothus knew it was a stupid question even as it left his mouth. Never mind. The opening spell. Audendat gave it to you. How do I say it? It'll come to you after I start. He planned it that way. I hate when he allows mind melting without asking us. Kalea had a faraway look on her face. You know he'd never let anything slip. We can trust him. I know. Can we start now? I want to leave as soon as possible. His wizard's light wavered a bit, and he glared at it. It quickly brightened up again. Ready? I'm starting. Kalea took a breath and started to speak. Slowly, each word precise and deliberate, sentences formed and began to glow on the door in front of them, clear and yet visible, flowing on and on as Kalea continued, and Rothus joined her. Their voices melded as their minds did, chanting as one voice in 2 notes, creating the spell that would open the door. The reality around them shifted and became transparent, changing into what the spell commanded. And then a roar. Not an audible roar, but a physical one, with a magnitude that knocked the young wizards off their feet. Rothus rolled over, panting as he struggled to get his breath back. The air around him hummed, like someone was snoring lightly with an undercurrent of expectancy. As he got to his feet, he saw Kalea standing very still a few yards ahead of him. Rothus sighed with relief. She was okay. Though, as he looked beyond her, at the dark shape throwing a huge shadow on the wall behind, his breath caught in his chest. "What is that?" he breathed out slowly, reaching for Kalea's hand. She accepted his, but didn't take her eyes off the monster before them. A rumbling noise emanated from the mass of gray flesh that sprawled on the black stone floor. "Is it sleeping?" Kalea reached into the air, her blue hand disappearing into an outer space pocket. She drew out a glowing ring with spells hanging off it. I think it was sleeping. Now it's waking up. So we just say the spell, right? Audendette gave me both of our parts. Kalea, that's what we came here for, to put the sentience back to sleep. Let's do it." Kalea still wouldn't look at him, like she was afraid to take her eyes off the snoring beast in front of them. "This is just a shell, a construct created to protect what the records call a sentience. We would call it a kernel." "You mean we have to mess with the kernel?" Rothus whispered desperately. "We're not experienced with kernels." "Rothus, you're afraid again. Where's your light?" He swallowed, and his red lantern bobbed in the air beside Kalea's blue one. She spoke softly, like she was speaking to a young child. "Good. Now listen to me very carefully. We have to wake the beast. No, shush. Listen. You will have to deal with him while I find the kernel. Remember, it has the sentience still clinging to it, so I'll probably have to talk to it for a while. If you can't simply incapacitate the beast, then we'll have to do away with him. Do you understand?" Rothus stared at her, taking in her unblinking periwinkle eyes, her steady hands and steady breathing. He'd faced worse than this. They'd faced worse than this and come out alive. They would do it again. At the very least, they could save another world's heart from it. "I understand. Are you sure you can convince the sentience to let go?" Kalea looked at him for a brief second, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "I have the truth. The truth is always more powerful than lies." She stepped forward and fingered one of the spells on her keychain and started whispering. Beside her, Rothus readied his own spells. The flesh creature, although a construct, was old and seasoned. Still, he had his last resort. If worst came to worst, his meteorite would take care of the flesh beast, and quite possibly himself and Kalea, but hopefully after she'd banished it from the kernel. "Come on, Kalea, I believe in you." He heard her say words in the wizardly speech that he didn't recognize. No doubt she was receiving knowledge even as she spoke. A new kind of quiet fell in the chamber, and Rothus realized that the gray flesh had stopped snoring. He blinked, and a single yellow eye blinked slowly back at him. Then a crease appeared, which turned into a crack, and then a large black hole in the skin-like surface of the flesh's body. From the hole came a stinking, terror-filled roar of the same magnitude that had previously bowled the young wizards over. Now, behind his shield, Rothus felt a wave of brute force mixed with fear crash over him. Again, he blinked. The flesh didn't stop roaring, but the yellow eye blinked back. Reciting 28 of 29 words to a powerful spell, Rothus refrained from speaking the last word, as a piece of knowledge came to him, in the same way Kalea seemed to receive hers. A voice with no sound and yet a rich tone filled his mind with the idea that the creature he was fighting feared him. Rothus puzzled over this for a moment, then said another spell instead, one that threw a muffler over the flesh and cut off its roar. The yellow eyes seemed to widen, and the creature made small whining sounds. Rothus glanced at Kalea, who was now gesturing wildly with long blue arms to accompany her speech. A tangle of pulsing light strings seemed to be coming out of that large hole in the flesh's skin. When it was within reach, Kalea snatched it from the air. With a great sigh and a massive groan, the flesh collapsed on the floor and slowly faded away. Kalea held the kernel and frowned. Rothus's grin faded quickly. "Did you do it?" She looked at him in discomfort and made a small amount of annoyance. "It's coming." Rothus made a choking sound. "But I thought there was just a shadow of it in the kernel." "There was. Now it wants to say something about why there isn't." Kalea lifted her head and turned around. Dreading what he knew he'd see, Rothus turned with her. In the glow of their wizard lanterns stood a tall, dark-cloaked figure. In the same way as before, Rothus received the knowledge that it was smiling. And that somehow was a good thing. Except, how could it be? A relatively simple intervention had turned into a full-scale confrontation with it. "Fairest and fallen, greetings and defiance." Kalea delivered the traditional greeting to the lone power in a voice that told it she thought it stood no chance against them. Rothus opened his mouth to say something brave, but no words came to mind. It chuckled, a mix between a growl and a hiss that sent chills down Rothus's entire body. He looked at Kalea, who actually managed to look bored with the encounter. "I think you should hand that over, wizards," it said smoothly. Kalea raised white eyebrows. "You do, huh? Well, I'm sorry, but I still have some adjustments to make." It growled again. "Do you really think you can change the world and leave so easily? You enter, you pay. The former inhabitants let me make the rules. Those are the rules." "Are you talking about the message?" It glared at her. "Ah, yes, you are very good at understanding things, aren't you? Then you will know that the message states the rules very clearly. You entered the chamber. You must pay the debt." Kalea sighed and twitched a glowing strand of the kernel. "The message said the debt must be paid, and it has been. You really are stupid if you think we all still are in your debt because you invented death." She tugged on another string. It winced and hissed at her. "The rules stand. You must obey." "The rules belong to you. We belong to life, the one, to the universe. Your petty rules have nothing on us." It advanced toward Kalea, and Rothus found the words he was looking for from the soundless voice in his head. "The debt will be paid. I'll pay it myself." Kalea gasped and reached out to tug on his hand. He brushed her off and said 6 words. Her eyes went wide and the kernel fell from stiff hands. Rothus neatly caught it and tossed it from one hand to the other. "Look here, Clokey. Here's how this will go down. I'll pay your price, and she goes free." It laughed outright, a terrible grating sound. "You think you can bargain with me?" Rothus grinned and held the kernel. "I know I can. See, my partner's very smart. Look at her face. You'd never know she was acting. Nobody wins a battle of words with Kalea. She really does understand things. That's why she understood the flaws in your message." Rothus started to pace. "See, all the emphasis that you put into restitution was a mistake. We have no part in your deal with the Dorflassen. That was between you and them." A word, and Kalea was released. He tossed the kernel back to her. She smiled and held it carefully, fiddling with more strings as she talked. "The Dorflassen paid already. You entered the chamber. It's your turn." It seethed. A rumbling from underneath its feet told Rothus the time to act was now or never. "Pay up!" he yelled, as he spoke the last words of his meteorite spell, and all hell broke loose. Actually, hell broke loose inside the chamber, where the shade of it was paying for his end of the bargain. Outside the temple, Rothus watched Kalea change the message to read, "The debt has been paid." "Where will you hide it?" he asked, jerking his head at the kernel in her hands. She smiled. "I don't think I'll tell you." She kept smiling, that Kalea, mysterious, "I know something you don't know" smile. "I'll hide it and then head back home. You should too. I know you're sorry wasn't too happy about us taking this mission. You should go tell her you're all right." Rothus nodded. Then he walked forward and hugged her tightly. She hugged him back, long arms wrapping around his stockier body. "Meet me at the usual place tomorrow?" She nodded back. "For sure. Day. The end.